I was born in Rome. I come from a very, deeply rooted Roman family. Colosseum, Julius Caesar. What am I to do with this kind of, with New York, with blues, with Paul Motian, and with jazz? And this brings me, of course, to my story, and to what, how can happen that this music born in the United States came to Europe, came to my house, and then I went to the house where this music was born, playing with native players, because, of course, the musicians that I recorded with are totally American and very much born in that culture. So my story briefly is that my main source, when I started very, very, very long time ago, I don't dare to say because it's really Jurassic, I'm sorry, and this makes me a bit, anyway, now it's too late to regret. But anyway, I started in '55, I was 5 years and a half old. My father was a guitar player, and that is also interesting. He was a jazz guitar player. He used to play in a kind of Charlie Christian style. And Django Reinhardt, I don't know if you heard his names, Django was his hero. But also Charlie Christian and all the string era musicians like Benny Goodman, Teddy Wilson, Lionel Hampton, and the big bands that came to Rome at the end of the Second War. So he was a jazz guitar player, but also he was a very good composer of folk, Roman songs, and also a singer of them. For some reason that I still try to detect, that probably I will never give an answer to, he bought a piano. And also he hired a teacher of piano for me. And so I started the usual itinerary that many classical students, classical music students do. So going to lessons, starting learning how to write music, how to read music, and so on. In the same time, this is the issue, at home, my father, with a guitar, used to sit close to me, and by heart, he used to teach me the chains of the blues and many American songs, because usually he used to play in the nightclubs, and in that time, middle 50s, but until I would say middle 60s, until the Beatles. That was the turning point. Until the Beatles erupted came into the music pop world, the main music that you can listen in a nightclub, let's say in the Dolce Vita era, were American songs. Gershwin, Rogers, Jerome Kern, Cole Porter, all these. And my father knew a lot of these. So he used to teach me. And I remember one of the first songs that he taught me by Gershwin is this one that I now will try to play in a different version. It's called Fascinating Rhythm. Allora, questo lo togliamo. Grazie. Grazie. Thank you so much. So my father was teaching me these songs by heart. So I became immediately a kind of case, because the big conflict usually in the books is written, jazz is an improvised music, meaning no written music. I was playing written music, learning Chopin, Bach, Haden, and so on, but in the same time, I was also playing music without any papers. And apparently it's not possible, but was possible, and so I had to deal with this. I used to like both the music, both the language. For me, there was no conflict. There was no problem. I mean, meaning I used to love both. So I decided, okay, probably I can go on with both. And in fact, this is what I did until now, I should say. And so, even if apparently this is impossible, because playing the two music seemed to be a strange question, something not possible, I think is possible. But still the question is there, meaning in terms of language, in terms of feeling, in terms of expression. Since the subject of this lecture that I'm very, very glad to give today is exactly jazz in Europe or jazz and Europe, I still questioning myself about this wonderful stream that brought this music to Europe, and to all the mutual streams that made influences from Europe on the USA music scene, and from USA music scene on the European scene. And this could be, of course, a very long speech. But in fact, as you see, when Paolo Prado very kindly invited me, I said, wow, this is, so I brought probably a lot of stuff. But fortunately, I came here by taxi because Rome is really a drag for the traffic sometimes. I mean, I get very stressed. I mean, when I have to park, I never find parking, and then the fines and the vigili, how do you call the vigili? The policeman. Anyway, traffic point. So I said, okay, I take a taxi. And by chance, I got a taxi driver that is extremely fond of blues. He recognized me. I'm not saying that to show that, no, because, you know, I like to be very much in a corner, like jazz is usually. Anyway, he told me, may I speak Italian? For a while, io l'ho presa già una volta, maestro. Ah, wow. Lei è Piernanunzi. Oh, yeah, Piernanunzi, sì. Okay. I'm very fond of blues. Me too, I say, okay. So, after 1 minute, I say, what do you play? You play some? Yes, I play guitar. Okay. And actually, he started talking about Jimi Hendrix, and he started, by the way, talking about a guitar player that I didn't know, but very good, called Gary Moore. Very good. But I'm sorry, I didn't know. He taught me about Gary Moore. So he said, you like to listen to some? Sure, put on. So he put a very nice song by Gary Moore. I assume that he's black, he's white. He's white. He sings wonderful, he plays wonderful. Actually, I mean, the taxi driver, Luca, was a bit strange when he said, you know, maestro, lui è morto molto giovane. Mi dispiace, che è successo? After a concert, okay, I was kind of say, okay, he was 52, he died after a concert, back to the hotel. And I was thinking about all the times I'm back to the hotel. I hope that this is not, anyway, whatever. But I say, okay, and anyway, put this, and when Paolo, because he's right, sometimes Romans can be very late guy. I used to be, now I'm getting a bit better, a bit older also. And I answer him, yes, I'm 2 minutes from the venue, from the university, and I'm listening to blues. That was true because, and also I checked the drummer. I said also, I mean, the guitar player sings and plays very well, but also there is a very good drummer. The drummer in the specific track was Bini Colaiuta. That is a great drummer. Bini Colaiuta is a drummer very much into studio work, but also he played with famous jazzmen. He's a very good one. Anyway, but what struck me was the blues. Because back to my childhood, blues changes were the first change that I learned. And I was wondering, what's magic in this small music form that really spread around all the planet? Because blues is everywhere. It's not as Gary Moore, Jimi Hendrix, rock, and the many other musical expressions clearly show. Blues is everywhere. And that is really the miracle. That was the hook for me to get into jazz, the blues. I had many, how do you call it? 78 giri, come li chiami?
78 RPM.
Yeah, exactly. I had, a bunch of 78 that my father used to buy, and those were my university, because I studied, besides my father teaching, I studied the language of jazz on these records. I still remember them. Three were by Charlie Parker, two by Lee Konitz and Larry Tristano, two by Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan, some by Django Reinhardt. They were enough for me for 15, 20 years, because I did, and this is one of the issues of jazz in Europe. But by the way, this is similar also in the United States, meaning that jazz can be studied nowadays. There are schools, Berkeley, a lot of institutions, but basically jazz is a self-teaching music. And there is a reason why you should hopefully learn it by yourself, because if you learn by yourself, since it's a very physical expression, there is no medium between you and the sound. Whereas if you study through books, even books talking of jazz, there is something between you and the souls, and this makes, I think, learning really not really good. But anyway, has to do with teaching. I go back to the blues. The blues is really an unbelievable key to understand how and why jazz, when it came to Europe, became really, something unbelievable for entire generations of artists, musicians, mainly in the 20s. And you know what? Years ago, I conceived a crazy project that that I proposed to a lot of associations, but nobody accepted so far. So we see, it's called Blues in the Classics. I made a research on all the blues written by European classical musicians. And there are many, mainly French. But then if you compare, for instance, this is the first that I put in this book, is Jelly Roll Blues. This is the Jelly Roll Morton. So it's a blues written by a black American musician. If you compare these to what European musicians call blues, it's really difficult to understand what's in common. There is not much in common. So now I will play a sample from this Jelly Roll Morton, and then an excerpt from some French musician, still called blues, but you will see that it's totally another musical expression, different. I need my glasses. Ho bisogno degli occhiali. Scusa, se no... Sorry. Allora, questo si chiama Jelly Roll. Vediamo un po' come fa. we go. Was written. Microphone. Oh, thank you. This was written, thanks, in 1915. Now we go to a French blues, written some years later by who? Vediamo un po', because I collected, just to compare, I collected, yeah. For instance, this. This is a blues written in 1923 by a French musician, very active at the time, not very known, called Jean Binaire. Jean Binaire used to be part of the group of musicians of the new generation, was very close to musicians like Darius Milhaud and Francis Poulenc, but also to Eric Satie, that was considered to be the maître à penser, come si dice in inglese? Maître à penser for this group. Okay, French is very much. And this is called blues, and this blues is the second movement of a sonata written by Binaire called Sonatine Syncopée. Okay? So you will listen, he called that blues. You will see. This is quite different. I would say it's quite different, right? So one should question first, which kind of music was the source for the European classical musicians that got crazy for the blues and for jazz in general, for blues in the 20s. For many years, I thought that jazz came to Europe through the records. Then I changed my mind because getting deeper into this, I discovered that actually the French musicians, but not only the French, also the German, like Kurt Weill, a bit also a Russian like Stravinsky and more musicians, anyway, all the Europeans actually entered the jazz fever not because the records of Armstrong or King Oliver or more, but because they had the opportunity to listen directly live to jazz musicians playing. And now we go to a very embarrassing subject, because shortly what really brought jazz to Europe were the two wars. Because it happened that when in 1917 USA entered the war, after the end of the war, many American musicians, black or white, it doesn't matter, stayed in Paris, stayed in London, but mainly in Paris. And these musicians like Jean Binaire, Darius Milhaud, Francis Poulenc, they had the opportunity to listen to them playing live. This is why they got crazy for this music. And they were trying to imitate the spirit of this music. But of course, I mean, culturally, they all the mood and spirit was totally different, because we are talking of musicians with a very classical, serious background. But anyway, they try to catch the spirit. But the perception was absolutely of the blues, of the jazz language, as they used to listen to it live, was of course a bit different than, because all the elements around them were different. Then, for instance, the elements, I mean, the social, cultural elements around, for instance, Jelly Roll Morton, or other players. So this made the music completely different. So they call blues what, and also what was jazz for French? Because anyway, we are very much, we European, we should be very grateful to France and Belgium, because actually where really jazz was started to be considered not only just an exotic way of playing, but something really serious, was in France. So we are very grateful to French musicians, to French cultural representatives. So, even for instance, a great supporter to jazz was a famous writer whose name was Jean Cocteau. But anyway, Paris in the 20s is well known. I mean, they're called the Roaring 20s, and in Paris there was everything. There were even Scott Fitzgerald, Picasso, and Stravinsky. All the top of any art expression was in those 10 years living there. But I mean, anyway, so we had to be very, I would say, very grateful to France, and because they got crazy for jazz. But I tried to get deeper into this, and we can say that what they call jazz was something totally different than we can imagine. Was not Louis Armstrong, was not King Oliver, was not even Jelly Roll Morton. They call jazz mainly the dances, meaning foxtrot, one-step, two-step, shimmy, and charleston. And sometimes, believe it or not, they call jazz also tango. They used to call jazz all the dances that implied a physical activity and a very strong rhythmical pulse. So all that was jazz for them, not what we... So even improvisation was not what struck them, actually, but the rhythmical dancing engine was what really fascinated these musicians. And so I would like to give another example, for instance. This is a tune actually written by Darius Milhaud. I will try the... Oops. Yeah. And in fact, you see here, he wrote Mouvement de Chimie. And this is actually a nice traditional, a bit strange sometimes, because Milhaud was also very much experimenting. So maybe you will listen to something apparently wrong, but not very much right. just. And that was, thank you. That was Chimie, another French musician of the 20s, very much close to jazz, probably less known than Mio, was Georges Auric, that wrote this funny piece called Foxtrot. So what I'm saying and trying to show is that the main source was dance for these musicians. This was, I mean, really the thing. Un attimo. And so on. This, no, it's a bit also unsettling, this music, I have to say, is it? Harmonically. And there is a strong theater element in this music, totally different than the performing, entertaining spirit that is in the music written and played in the same time in the United States. It would be a very, very long speech, but just to give you an idea of what I mean, I would like to play something by the champion of jazz, for many still the champion now, and this was George Gershwin. I found a couple of articles extremely interesting that I would like to read a bit from. And because Gershwin was extremely aware of what he was doing. But once again, what was happening in the 20s in the United States, mainly by him and other musicians, and what was happening in Europe was totally different, even if apparently they were talking about the same subject. It was totally another story. Here is an article that I found by Gershwin called, title is The Relation of Jazz to American Music. And he says, all the great music of the past in other countries has always been built on folk music. This is the strongest source of musical fecundity. America is no exception among the countries. The best music being written today is music which comes from folk sources. It is not always recognized that America has folk music, yet it really has not only one but many different folk musics. And so on. And he concludes, jazz I regard as an American folk music. Not the only one, but a very powerful one, which is probably in the blood and feeling of the American people more than any other style of folk music. I believe that it can be made the basis of serious symphonic works of lasting value in the hands of a composer with talent for both jazz and symphony music. I'm afraid he was talking about himself a bit. That is also right, because he was completely a genius. But anyway, this article, besides what he says, that is extremely deep and stimulating, show that he was aware of what he was doing. And by the way, I have to say, going back to Scarlatti, or to, I don't know, Hurricane, or other musicians that nowadays cross over the music, that he was somehow a prophet. He saw very much in advance the possibilities of mixing the two languages that at the time was experimental, but nowadays considered to be, I mean, I wouldn't say normal, but almost normal. It's normal. So now I would like to give you an example of Scarlatti, but it can be even Bach, and how improvisation the improvisational process can be used in virtually on any material. Recently, I recorded early January. I recorded a CD based on Debussy music that I arranged for trio, for quartet, for quintet. And I used Debussy's very well-known pieces, but I use sometimes a word to explain how I work with this music, and the word is materiali, the matters. Materiali can be an arpeggio, can be a rhythmic pattern, whatever. So now I will play, for instance, a tarantella by Domenico Scarlatti, and then I will try to improvise on it and make it, some that I hope will be mine, even if, of course, I'm very grateful to Scarlatti to give me the material, la materia, the bricks. He gave me the bricks, and I will try to make my building with Scarlatti's bricks. Thank you. Okay, so the improvisational process is part of jazz, and this, of course, but it was not part of, it has been part of any music before jazz. What jazz really did, and that shocked the European musical environments, I think, was to go back to a kind of vitality, dancing vitality, that in the European music had been lost. And had been lost mainly in the start of the 20th century, because the intellectual process of making music had completely brought musicians to a kind of abstractions, not anymore physical. So there was no dance anymore. So jazz brought to Europe the energy of the body somehow that had been forgotten. And of course, that was the perfect age for all that, because it was after the tragedy of the First War that people rediscovered the pleasure of moving, of dancing. And that was also behind this kind of fever that was in Paris, but it was all over Europe, because also there were German musicians, even German musicians, rediscovered dancing, like Ernest Krenek. Ernest Krenek wrote a musical called Johnny Spieltauf that was extremely successful. The early Kurt Weill also adopted dances rhythm in his theater works. Even I say the three penny, come si chiama in inglese? Like three penny opera. There are tangos, there are kind of bluesy stuff. So once again, dance. Then, to make things a bit, quick, there was a kind of totally paralysis after 33 all over Europe. I should talk also about my country, and also in my country, unfortunately, there was a kind of paralysis, meaning after the fever of the 20s, jazz started to be seen as dangerous. Dangerous, so it was kind of blocked. And to be quick, there was a second war, unfortunately, a second tragedy, and once again, and I come back to me, I started talking about my father and me, once again was the second war to bring jazz again to Europe. And once again, this jazz coming from the United States had much to do with dancing. Was the swing music of big bands like Tommy Dorsey, like Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and so on. This was a second fever that came to all over Europe again, and that made jazz again be beloved all around. My father used to play with an ensemble that usually played arrangements by Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller. And he used to tell me that in the 46, 47, 48, until early 50s, people were crazy to dance, they wanted to dance, Boogie Woogie came quite late, by the way, because Boogie Woogie actually was a way to play the piano that had been very popular in the 20s in the States. In Europe, it came a bit late and became an orchestral and dancing form of music. The paradox of all this story is that jazz came to Europe through, should we take the words? It's a bit tough. But, of course, we won't take the words, but, culturally, what happened was that the two words brought to Europe this language, mainly the dancing approach to this language, and this made jazz very popular in Europe. I would like to show you one thing, because this has to do with the easier. Oh, mamma mia, troppe cose scritte. Okay. Yeah, I would like to go back 1 second, because also there are a lot of cliché commonplaces about, come si chiama, luoghi comuni? Cliché, commonplaces about jazz. For instance, So far I thought about the influence of jazz music on Europe, but also there was the opposite. European music influenced jazz a lot. The first influence actually was very strong on the so-called early jazz, even if what I'm gonna play now is not completely considered jazz because I'm talking about ragtime. Ragtime is not exactly a jazz form because there is no improvisation and is a rhythm music. Yet, in ragtime, there are two elements that are exactly, they relate perfectly to this lecture, and these are that there is a strong rhythmical pulse that is to make things easy is the American heritage, and there are harmonic elements that clearly come from European Western tradition, because Scott Joplin and all the other composers of ragtime used to listen a lot to operas. New Orleans was, as you know, had been a French town with a lot of opera theaters and with a lot of French and Italian operas that you can very easily listen. So harmonically, ragtime has to do with the European tradition, rhythmically has to do with the American tradition. And anyway, it's not considered to be real jazz, but of course, he had to do very much with the development of jazz, at least later. This is a short example of, by the way, this piece was written, Maple Leaf Rag was written in 1899, and it seems that the score of this, not the record, sold really more than 1 million copies. The score, the music, not the record. Whereas, go back to Gershwin, another unbelievable thing for us today is that one of his songs, and that was a different, in 1919, a song called S01E sold 1,078,000. Not the score, but this song, S01E, sold milioni di copie di dischi and made Gershwin really famous all over the United States and very rich, by the way. In fact, as you know, this is maybe a bit a funny aspect of the relationship between USA and Europe for jazz, is that you know that Gershwin, that was an unbelievably talented, he's obvious, a musician, always liked to learn about classical music. So there is an anecdote quite well known. He was in Paris in 1928, and by the way, took inspiration from the La Ville Lumière to write this fantastic American in Paris. Anyway, he wanted to meet the main musicians of the time. Of course, the best in that moment, the most prestigious, the most on demand, the most fashionable was Maurice Ravel. So he arranged, I mean, Gershwin was in Paris with his brother Ayler and with a sister-in-law also. And anyway, the meeting was arranged. And so Gershwin said, I would like to really have lessons from you, Maestro Ravel. I really would like to learn something. All your art, your science. And it seems that Ravel answered, dear Mr. Gershwin, tell me, how much do you earn in a year? He said, I don't know, $300,000. So you should give lesson to me to learn how I can earn all this money. Anyway, besides that, there is this unbelievable approach that Gershwin had towards the classical music, but also this kind of, how do you say, clarity of mind. He was very clear in his mind about the music of the future. So now I will read a paragraph from an article of his own that probably sounds very good today also, sounds very attuale, molto attuale, very much of these days. He says, in this article called Jazz is the Voice of the American Soul. It's an article written in March 1927. He says, I don't know what the next decade will disclose in music. No composer knows, but to be true, music, it must repeat the thought and aspirations of the people and the time. My people are Americans. My time is today. Of tomorrow and of my tomorrow, as an interpreter of American life in music, I am sure of but one thing, that the essence of future music will hold enough of the melody and harmony of today to reveal its origin. It will be sure to have a tincture of the derided yesterday, which has been accepted today and which perhaps tomorrow will be exalted, jazz. So he considered, what is very interesting in these articles is how wide the conception of jazz was in Gershwin musical composing experience and also in his thought. So I think that I should play now something, because I would like to play a piece, a fantastic piece that Gershwin wrote that is actually a blues. So we go back to the blues. Then I will play a blues on mine. This is quite, thank you. Vai così. Okay. Yes, thank you. You will recognize this. This is a fantastic, it's the second of his famous three preludes. And actually is one of the most touching blues ever written. Io penso un'ultima cosa, può bastare? Thanks so much. Thanks to Mr. Gershwin for writing this wonderful music. Thanks to you, and I would like to conclude this very nice meeting with a blues on my own, if you don't mind. An improvisation, okay? Since I don't know exactly what I'm gonna play, I will call it John Cabot Blues. If Mr. John Cabot doesn't get upset, what do you think about it? Okay, John Cabot Blues? Okay. This is the first and last time I will play because I have to improvise now. So, via tutta questa carta. Basta la carta, via. Non la voglio vedere. Mannaggia. Mi cambio pure gli occhiali perché non devo leggere. Vediamo che cosa succede. Don Cabot. This is Don Cabot Blues for you. Thank you for coming. Thanks a lot. Grazie a Paolo per avermi invitato, a voi per essere qui. See you soon. Grazie. Un bis, sì, se vuoi, sì, un bis. Okay, encore. Okay, we change atmosphere then because after, I mean, the speech should have been longer, but anyway, I will play a tune of mine that probably will sound very much European. I consider it jazz, but this may be very European, so it's perfect for this lecture. Thank you very much. E poi vediamo un po' cosa possiamo suonare.
Grazie a voi.